Today's rather an auspicious day
Rishaad.
for Bitcoin itself. Tell us what halvening is and why it happens.
Certainly, Rishaad. So the number of Bitcoins entering circulation every 10 minutes was reduced by half earlier this morning. It's a milestone that occurs every 4 years, and it's happened twice before in Bitcoin's short 11-year existence. Now, some argue that because of Bitcoin's finite supply and one that is reducing the amount of Bitcoin entering the market over time, that it's a deflationary currency. Very, very contrasting from a debt-based inflationary money, which largely creates a treadmill economy, if you wish, and pushes assets up the wealth inequality ladder. That's what we're witnessing just now. That was today's event.
Dave, what does it mean for prices looking ahead, in your view?
I mean, Bitcoin definitely is volatile. It's been volatile ever first come into mainstream adoption. But the reality is that, a lot of people consider Bitcoin to be a social experiment. Now, given how battle-scarred Bitcoin is, having survived every test thrown at it to date, I'm not so sure you can still call it as such. We're seeing a lot of interest from accredited investors. We're seeing a lot of interest from traditional finance. I think one or two of the many reasons why we haven't seen wider adoption from traditional finance is twofold, Rishaad. One is the lack of regulatory clarity, but we're now seeing innovative regulation coming into effect globally, notwithstanding both Hong Kong and in Singapore. And secondly, a lack of quality custodians. I'll be the first to admit that this sector doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to managing client funds. However, what we're seeing now is a number of participants that are maturing in this space, such as Volatile, who are providing insured and audited custodian services. It provides the level of security and confidence that a traditional custodian would.
Dave, let's pick up on prices. We see Bitcoin close to 9,000, but still about 50% off the all-time highs we saw back in, 2017. Will it test those levels again? Will it go? What's your predictions?
For sure. If we zoom out a little bit first, yes, Bitcoin earlier in March did have its second largest drop in its history. But the reality is that Bitcoin is extremely volatile. But the fact remains that Bitcoin was the best performing asset or best performing investment of the decade, and actually is still one of the best performing investments in 2020 to date. Some argue that whether Bitcoin is uncorrelated or whether it's a store of value. If we look at empirical data over the last 10 years, Bitcoin has been largely uncorrelated with equities, fixed income, and oil and others. There's definitely a thesis that Bitcoin is a hedge against a declining global economy. And it should be noted that, investors, whilst they still choose to ignore it, that we're finding that there's a growing interest, and it's very hard to ignore given the factual investment history and performance to date.
But there are lots of non-believers out there. We have Nouriel Roubini, possibly among the biggest non-believers. He calls the mother and father of all scams, and he takes issue with the security of Bitcoin. He says there's a lack of security. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Bitcoin naysayers, and there will continue to be so for some time. I mean, in the same way technology has changed over time, whether it be newspapers, cassette tapes, fax machines, bonded couriers, the reality is that everything in our society, from commerce to entertainment, is going digital. And so in the same way society already maintains digital value with their online presence, their social media accounts, society will have to also consider having a digital store of value such as Bitcoin. And given the unprecedented quantitative easing that we're enduring right now, what we're seeing at OSL is that professional investors are much more open to consider alternatives to government-issued currencies, especially now that the money machines are printing what appears to be an endless amount of money.
Dave, obviously we mentioned the COVID world we live in at the moment and digital currencies and digital wallets, which some people are moving in that direction, but they throw up a whole load of privacy concerns. How do you assuage those? People having digital wallets, how that affects your privacy, and how do you assuage the impact that has on those very concerns?
For sure, Rishaad. So thank you. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, if we talk about central bank digital currencies, every major central bank has been looking into digital currencies for years. However, given the recent news and trials of the DCEP program in China, it has certainly expedited efforts to get to market as quickly as possible. And I'll admit that with some of these government-issued digital currencies, there are privacy concerns. But the fact of the matter remains is that cash is dead, and all of these digital currency initiatives will very likely pave the way for wider acceptance of non-government-issued digital currencies such as Bitcoin. To quote recently Paul Tudor-Jones, he said the most compelling argument for owning Bitcoin is the coming digitization of currency everywhere, and that it's been accelerated by COVID-19. There are a growing number of well-respected traditional investors that are moving into this asset class. Bitcoin is a real thing.
But Dave, tell me, most currencies that we have anyway are fiat currencies. This is just another fiat currency, surely?
Well, it's not at all, Rishaad. I mean, if you look at what's happening right now with the exceptional quantitative easing from central banks, it's leading to a growing number of investors to consider Bitcoin as a hedge against their existing portfolios and a hedge against inflation. I think at the moment, when we say is it just another fiat currency? Not at all. By its very nature of it being limited in supply, that some could argue that it is a deflationary currency. So it's extremely different from a government-issued currency where endless money printing can take place. And that's one of the main reasons we're seeing so many professional accredited investors at OSL actually come to us and start to consider this to get exposure into this asset class.
Dave, apart from Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies that are standing out to you?
It's going to be an interesting future. Obviously, Bitcoin was the first decentralized blockchain currency that came into inception in 2009. It has that first mover advantage. It has that network effect. It has been the most battle-hardened, proven cryptocurrency of its time. Where we go for in the future, me personally, I think Bitcoin will still hold that title for some time. Whether it holds it forever, I probably won't go on the record for saying that. But we're actually seeing just the fact that we're seeing such a wider push towards digital currency. We also anticipate this year we will see security tokens come into effect. The ability to tokenize commodities, equities, and other investments on a blockchain, which will have an enormous amount of benefits for both consumers alike.